On the seemingly ordinary morning of May 5th, 2009, a husband and father left the house to go to the gym. When he returned, his family was dead.
When you left the house this morning, was your wife alive?
Oh, yeah.
This is Chris Coleman, a veteran, a Christian, and a loving father. He lived a comfortable life with his 2 sons and their mom, his wife, Sheri. But the domestic ideal began to fracture when this all-American family started to receive anonymous threats in their mailbox. And on May 5th, 2009, Chris said goodbye to his wife at home for the last time. While he was out, she didn't respond to any of his messages, and fearing the worst because of the threats the family had been receiving, Chris called the police. What the police discovered was an unspeakable scene of horror. Disturbing messages were scrawled on the walls in blood-red paint, and the 3 occupants of the house, Sheri and her 2 boys aged 11 and 9, were dead.
You're at a great point to be able to help us to try to figure this out. We already know what happened. We need to know why it happened.
What had happened to this seemingly happy suburban family? And why had Chris been spared? Let's dive into the horrifying story of the Coleman family murders. This case takes us to the quiet suburb of Columbia, Illinois. Just south across the river from the far more dangerous city of St. Louis, Missouri, Columbia is rated safer than 69% of U.S. cities, with an average of 1 violent crime per every 1,000 residents. This kind of statistic can be comforting, but not when you're that 1 in 1,000, and not when the danger lies within your very house. 31-year-old homemaker Sheri Coleman never expected it to be her. She and Chris lived a quiet life, raising their 2 sons, though Chris was often away on business, as he worked security for a prominent televangelist, Joyce Meyer. They were a short drive away from Chris's parents, who could provide childcare if the couple wanted to go out in the evening, and the family got along well with their neighbors in the quiet suburb. But this beautiful family, it turned out, had made an enemy. In mid-November 2008, they began to receive haunting anonymous communications. The first was an email sent to Chris, Joyce Meyer, and her son from the address destroychris@gmail.com. It was filled with obscenities and threats, with the subject line reading, "Chris's family, they are dead." It seemed to threaten Chris in connection with Joyce's preaching, implying that it was his job putting the family in danger. "If Joyce doesn't quit preaching the bullshit," the email read, "then they will die. During the Houston conference, I will kill them all as they sleep. If I don't hit there, then I will kill them during the book tour or the trip to India. I know where he lives, and I know they are alone." This horrifying message was made even more sinister by the author's clear familiarity with Joyce's schedule, and so by extension, Chris's schedule. They knew that Chris was often away touring with Joyce, leaving his family alone and vulnerable, and there would be more of these notes to follow. Indeed, Chris received a letter early the following January. Left in the Colemans' mailbox, it was unsigned and contained similar obscenities and threats, calling on them to, quote, "deny your God publicly or else. No more opportunities. Time is running out for you and your family," unquote. It was noted that opportunities was spelled wrong. This was turning into a campaign of harassment, a campaign that continued into April, when Chris received a letter that began with the phrase, "I am giving you the last warning." The author continued to suggest that their vendetta was connected to Chris's religious profession, protecting Joyce Meyer. They wrote, "I have warned you to stop traveling and to stop carrying on with this fake religious life of stealing people's money. You think you are so special to do what you do protecting or think you are protecting her. This is my last warning. Your worst nightmare is about to happen." Chris contacted the police, but they had little success in tracing the threatening messages. One of the Colemans' neighbors was a Columbia Police Detective Sergeant called Justin Barlow, and he agreed to keep an eye on the neighborhood using his professional experience to see if anything stood out as suspicious. He installed a security camera overlooking the Colemans' mailbox, hoping to get a clear shot of the culprit. While it seemed the writer was finished leaving letters, instead the situation escalated, proving their threats weren't empty promises, and the Colemans' peaceful suburban street would never be the same. It was Barlow that Chris called for help that fateful morning of May 5, 2009. It was a regular Tuesday, and the air outside was mild, and Chris was heading out to go to his gym in South St. Louis County. While he was out, he called his wife Sheri twice and left a message. He also texted her, and she didn't answer. As he was driving back home over the Jefferson Barracks Bridge across the Mississippi River, he called Detective Sergeant Barlow to check on his family. Sheri usually picked up the phone, he said, and she'd usually be awake by this time. It was about 6:45 in the morning. Barlow, knowing about the threats the Colemans had been receiving, called it in to his department. He met with another Columbia police officer in front of the house after ringing the doorbell and receiving no response from inside. Together, they found an open window around the back of the house, with the window screen leaning against a table and patio chairs. They went into the house through this open window, and immediately they were confronted by the chemical smell of spray paint. Sure enough, when they rounded the corner and went up the stairs from the basement, they found the walls littered with disturbing writing in blood-red spray paint. The writing included more obscenities and the phrases, "You have paid," "punished," and "I am always watching." While the police were examining this chilling scene, they heard a door open down in the basement, which turned out to be Chris returning home from the gym. They told him to stay outside while they investigated the rest of the property, and when they went up to the bedrooms, they made the worst discovery of all. Chris's family murdered in their beds. Sheri was found naked and face down in her bedroom, her body already setting into rigor mortis. 11-year-old Garrett and 9-year-old Gavin were also dead in their rooms, with spray paint on the walls and on their bodies. All three had been strangled. The evidence suggested that Sheri had been strangled first, as a couple of her hairs were found on Gavin's body. The police officers went back outside to tell Chris what had happened. Chris started to cry and made no attempt to go back inside the house. By now, it was about 7:05 a.m. The day had barely started, and Chris's family was dead.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're sad to announce that there's been we're investigating a triple homicide here in the city of Columbia. Deceased at the home at 2854 Robert Drive is a female by the name of Sheri Coleman. She's 31 years old, and her two children, Garrett Coleman, who's 11 years old, and Gavin Coleman, who is 9 years old.
So what had happened? Did this shocking killing have to do with Chris's work with the televangelist, as the threatening notes had suggested, or was there something else at play? To understand this crime, we'll have to dive into the Coleman family's background. Chris Coleman was born on March 20th, 1977, making him 32 at the time of the murders. He grew up the son of two evangelical pastors in Monroe County, Illinois, which seemed to have translated into his later career ambitions working for Joyce Meyer. But before this, when he graduated from high school, he enlisted in the Marine Corps. It was through this service that he met Sheri, then Sheri Weiss, in 1997. Sheri was born in July 1977, making her only a few months younger than Chris. She was an Illinois native too, from Berwyn, and she was in the U.S. Air Force. They met at a canine training seminar at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas in May 1997, when he was 20 and she was 19. Though they were almost fresh out of high school, they fell for each other rapidly and committed to each other without wasting a moment. getting married only a few months later. Their son Garrett was born not long after, and after another 2 years, they had Gavin too. Seeking a more stable, suburban existence, Sheri became a homemaker and Chris entered the field of private security. With his Christian roots, it made sense for him to join the security team of Joyce Meyer, a televangelist and head of an international Christian ministry. Soon enough, he rose through the ranks and became Meyer's personal bodyguard, earning $100,000 a year. This afforded the Colemans a comfortable lifestyle, but it also meant that Chris was constantly traveling with Meyer on her tours, and that apparently any threats to Meyer were threats to him and his family as well. Meyer was known for her high-flying lifestyle, traveling in a private jet to attend various speaking engagements. She had also known Chris for a long time.
How long have you known him?
Since he was a little boy.
And how was that?
His parents came to some conferences that I did over in Illinois. I did a weekly meeting over there, and his mother came to it, brought him with him.
It made sense then that he'd gravitated towards her ministry in his adult life and spent so much time traveling the country with her for work.
He traveled with us when we did conferences, when we did speaking engagements, and when we went out of the country and did crusades in other countries.
How often, was it monthly that you would take one of these longer trips?
Well, out of the country, we would only go 2 to 3 times a year. And then we did 13 conferences here in the U.S. And there may have been some years where we did even more than that.
Chris's job was a huge part of his life, not only in earning a living, but also being a Christian and so inhabiting a certain lifestyle. There was pressure to live up to Christian values and be of upstanding character. From the outside, Chris and his family fit this ideal. But as the saying goes, no one really knows what goes on inside a marriage except the people in it. And now, Chris's marriage was over, and his family was dead. Garrett, Gavin, and Sheri had all died by ligature strangulation. There was no DNA on their bodies apart from Chris's DNA. There was also a question about the time of death. One of the police officers who had discovered the body was accustomed to responding to traffic accidents with people dead at the scene, and so he had seen a lot of dead bodies. In his experience, he'd never noticed them when they'd just died to look the way the Colemans did. No, instead, the evidence of rigor mortis, as the medical examiner later identified, suggested that Chris's family had died much earlier than the window after he'd left the house at 5:43 a.m. In fact, it was placed at some time between 3 and 5 a.m. This meant that they died while he was in the house. Far from kissing his wife goodbye as he left her sleeping with his 2 young boys also asleep in their rooms, the evidence indicated that they'd been dead already, and this suggested a horrible truth, that Chris had been the one to kill them. There was other evidence to back this up. There were scratch marks on Chris's arm that he was trying to cover up, going so far as to ask for a blanket during his interview. The words sprayed in the lurid red paint on the dead boy's bed sheets matched a sample of Chris's handwriting, and the CCTV camera installed by Detective Sergeant Barlow, designed to catch the person who'd been making such awful threats, showed no suspicious activity around the mailbox at the time of the letter's delivery, and also showed no one entering the house after Chris had left for the gym. Chris had arrived at the house after the police got there at 6:56 a.m., 13 minutes after his first call to Barlow from the Jefferson Barracks Bridge. That same journey usually takes about 7 minutes. Why the delay? Was he disposing of evidence? Waiting to ensure the police discovered the bodies before he did to avert suspicion in some way? We don't know. Neither did the police. They took Chris into custody and interviewed him for nearly 6 hours.
When you left the house this morning, was your wife alive?
Oh, yeah.
What would you say if I told you that I don't think she was?
I don't know what to tell you. I think she was. And she was.
Okay.
She was laying right beside me.
Right. And I'm not doubting that. I'm not doubting that you were there, and I'm not doubting that you care. But I am I am doubting that she was alive when you left this morning.
The timing of the deaths was the most damning piece of evidence the investigators could wield against him. They explained to him the timing behind rigor mortis and how a medical examiner could determine time of death.
You can't argue with physical evidence.
I'm not trying to argue with it.
All right, we both know that. I've done this a long time. I'm looking into your eyes, and I can tell you're not being truthful, Chris. As bad as this sounds, as bad as this looks, or you may think it looks, we understand, and I've talked to many people who have given me reasons, and it's like, you know what? Okay, all right, I can understand how somebody might have been feeling that at that time. And maybe they acted on it, and they shouldn't have, and they regret it. There's no way to turn clocks back. You can't turn clocks back.
The investigators came at Chris from an understanding, empathetic position, encouraging him to confess to the murders of his family. They also dug into the details of the threats the Colemans had been receiving.
Do you still have those on your computer?
I can look. Okay. They might be on the server.
Okay. Up until November, had you ever gotten threats like that before?
No, people have been upset with me. If I just been there this morning.
One thing Chris never asked was how his family had been killed. The investigators probed him about the graffiti too, getting him to give them a writing sample.
Do you have any paint at your house?
I think so.
No, don't.
I don't think so.
This was a lie. Credit card receipts showed that he'd purchased a can of spray paint in that same bright red only a few months prior. The evidence was mounting. Though he did not confess during the interview, the investigation afterwards pointed squarely to Chris as the killer. And it turned out there had been no stranger with a vendetta, either against Joyce Meyer or the Colemans. Instead, the emails were traced to an account Chris had set up himself 6 months earlier, and the note that contained the word opportunities spelled wrong was another clue. In a search of Chris's computer, the investigators found several instances of opportunities spelled that same wrong way, with a U. It was undeniable that he'd been the one sending the threats to cover his tracks. So clearly he'd been planning this for a while. But why? Why destroy his family in such a horrifying way?
We kind of talked about the divorce a little bit.
This last December?
Yeah. And I went to Joyce with it.
Sheri and Chris had talked about divorce, but they resolved to get counseling instead of going through with it. This was suggested to have been a result of Joyce Meyer's input, as divorce is frowned upon among some evangelicals. Joyce said,
What he told me is that he felt that Sheri was very controlling, that no matter what he did, she wasn't happy, and that they just in general, were not getting along, and that he was just really tired of it.
Sheri and Chris's issues were a lack of communication, according to Chris, but they were working things out. This is what he told the investigators. But Sheri wasn't happy and even seemed to be afraid. She told a friend, "If something happens to me, Chris did it." Chris also told the investigators about something else, a woman named Tara Lintz.
Tara in Florida that you guys might have talked to, I've talked to her a ton lately.
And what's with that?
It's just a friend, someone to talk to.
Tara was a cocktail waitress and a friend of Sheri's from back in high school. She was 31 and had graduated the year after Sheri had. Chris said he met her through Sheri when the family went down to Florida on vacation.
You said you had a close friendship. But were you actually doing anything that you felt wouldn't be approved by your wife?
Some of the conversations, probably.
This would prove to be an understatement. When the police in Florida spoke to Tara, she revealed that their relationship was much more intimate than mere friendship. She handed over her devices, and when the police analyzed the contents, they found explicit photos and videos of Chris and Tara together. They found the same content on Chris's devices, several hundred of them. There was also a sex tape taken when they went together on vacation to Hawaii. The investigators confronted Chris with this information. He reacted on the defensive.
Any other
I
thing
didn't
too?
think it was an affair.
You didn't think it's fair? Because she
Fair is
saw.
when you're like living with them and you're gonna get married and everything.
Chris's relationship with Tara was, in his mind, just a fling between friends. This is what he told the police. But Tara had different ideas. In her calendar, she had scheduled an event called Wedding to Chris Coleman. She had also scheduled their vacations together, and they held joint credit card accounts. There were also notes found on Chris's phone that detailed Tara's birthday, height, eye color, shoe size, ring size, jean size, favorite flowers, and perfume preferences, and the food and sports team she liked and didn't like. On a note titled Christmas was written, "Promise ring, loves circle diamond or diamond cross." There was yet another note that read, "Our daughter's name, Zoe Lynn Coleman." Clearly, things between Tara and Chris were far more serious than he suggested to the police. Tara said they'd actually met in November 2008 at a Joyce Meyer conference where Chris was working. Sheri, unsuspectingly, had called her old friend and suggested she go to the conference. Tara did, and the rest was history. She and Chris texted and called constantly, and their relationship became physical in December when Chris was in Florida for work. Interestingly, this was after the first threatening email, which was sent only 9 days after Chris and Tara first met. Tara testified that she and Chris planned to get married, and that he told her he was speaking to an attorney about a divorce. He told her he was collecting divorce papers to give to Sheri on May 4th, but that fell through because Sheri's name was spelled incorrectly. On May 4th, he called in sick to work.
On May the 4th, he called and told me that he wasn't feeling good and asked if he could take the day off.
May the 4th, 2009.
Right.
Was that unusual for the defendant?
Yes.
We don't know exactly what Chris did on May 4th. He told Tara that the corrected divorce papers would be available on May 5th. But instead, on May 5th, he killed his wife. Perhaps he couldn't wait, or perhaps he never intended to get a divorce and had been planning for this all along. Tara had a complicated relationship with the wider Coleman family. She'd received explicit photos from Chris's brother Keith, and Sheri's brother had also contacted her over social media and asked her to marry him. But it was Chris who had her heart. Chris, who may have committed murder for her. He'd even texted her during his family's funeral, saying he loved her and missed her. Chris and Tara had matching promise rings. She wore hers to the trial because 2 weeks after the killings, Chris was charged with the murders of Sheri, Garrett, and Gavin Coleman. Despite the lack of a confession, there was enough physical evidence for the prosecutors to bring his case to trial. And a motive, too, since to get a divorce was incompatible with his work, while Tara had given him an ultimatum to divorce his wife and marry her instead.
If a person was having an adulterous affair and then filed for divorce from their spouse to be with that person, then their employment may have been terminated.
May have been, yes.
Chris was using his work phone for much of his correspondence with Tara. In December 2008, at the beginning of the affair, he messaged one of his co-workers, Christine, saying that Sheri had sent him some provocative pictures on his work phone and wanting to know if anyone else at the ministry could see them. Christine confirmed that photos sent to his work phone were private, but when Sheri talked to Christine less than a month later, saying Chris wanted a divorce, Christine grew suspicious. She checked Chris's work phone under instruction from Joyce Meyer's son Daniel, who also worked at the ministry. She found an extensive call history of contact with a Florida number, Tara's number. When Daniel called the number, Tara answered. When Daniel confronted Chris about this mystery woman at the other end of the phone, Chris said Tara was a friend of Sheri's and that he'd been calling Tara to talk to her fictional husband for marital advice. Daniel accepted this explanation, but it had been a close call. Each of the Joyce Meyer ministry employees who testified in the trial confirmed that it was likely an employee would be fired if it was discovered they were having an affair. And so, killing Sheri and the boys in Chris's twisted imagination, as was argued at the trial, was his only way out. This was a convincing motive, but the reliance on circumstantial evidence troubled the jury. At an early point during deliberations, they stood at 7-5 not guilty, and they sent a note to the judge saying, "We are a hung jury." There was no confession and no solid DNA evidence to convict, but on the second day of deliberations, some of the jurors re-examined the photo evidence taken from Tara's BlackBerry. They found a photo taken of Chris and Tara kissing on October 21st, 2008, weeks before both parties said the affair had started in November. If he was lying about this, what else was he lying about? And so, after 15 hours of deliberations,
guilty on all 3 counts.
Chris Coleman was found guilty of the murder of his wife and 2 sons. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole, narrowly escaping the death penalty because Illinois' repeal of the law was only months away from taking effect. Chris maintained his innocence and unsuccessfully appealed. He claimed he had 2 laptops and that anyone could have gotten to his second laptop to create the Destroy Chris email account to frame him. His father, Pastor Ron Coleman, denied that his son could have killed his family. He said, "Tara was just meeting a need at the time that Sheri wasn't taking care of. Every man has his desires, and every man has to be respected. It's built into every man. If your wife doesn't respect you, then you're going to find respect someplace else." Sheri's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Joyce Meyer Ministries, blaming Joyce Meyer for failing to suspect that Chris had sent the threatening letters and warning Sheri about the danger she was in. The suit was dismissed in 2013. Chris Coleman remains in prison today. Many people have drawn parallels between his case and that of Chris Watts in 2018, who also murdered his family because of his affair with another woman. The 2 killers now reside at the same prison, Dodge Correctional Institution in Wisconsin. What do you think about this horrifying story? Did Chris Coleman inspire Chris Watts? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe, keep up with our channel, and we will see you very soon on The Decoder.